Hi, Jamie.
Hi.
You made it.
I did make it. I was very nervous.
Well, we're not going to start for another minute or two, but I'm going to join you up on stage as people are joining us. So give me just a minute.
Sure.
Okay. Hi.
Hi. Nice
Yeah, nice to see you.
to
So
meet you.
we've got a couple minutes before we're going to get started. So it's a very simple app to use. Once you've tried it once, it's very self-explanatory. So people have the option to join us on stage. They can invite themselves on stage at any time and ask you questions or make comments. We'll also be broadcasting on our public profile page for those who aren't in our virtual audience. And then also we'll be broadcasting on our social media channels, which, by the way, you can do as well if you want to play with that and try it. You just go down to the circle in the lower left-hand corner of your screen and you click
Um,
that on, and there's a little globe that says broadcast to the world or something like that.
I don't- oh, I see. Yep. And it would just automatically go to what? Instagram or?
I can barely hear you. I'm going to turn up my volume.
I'll turn mine up. Can you hear me better now?
Oh, yeah, much better. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm just waiting for our team to join us, and they'll be broadcasting live as well. So give us just a minute or two, everybody, and we'll be getting started shortly.
Okay. I think I need to get some better. I don't have great lighting in my office, and but can you see me okay? I guess.
Yeah, it's a little dark, but it's okay. We can see you, and you can also use your fingers to touch the screen and stretch it out so that the images are bigger, and sometimes that's helpful as well.
You can see that it's dark, but it feels bright in here when I'm in here. But then when I see it on my camera, I can see it's not very bright.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm waiting for our team to get here, but I think we're going to go ahead and get started because I want to be respectful of your time and everybody in our audience. So hello, Firesiders, and welcome to Adventures by the Book, where our mission is to connect people and communities through the superpower of books. I am your host, Susan McBeth, and I'm delighted to be hosting today Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestselling author Jamie Beck, who's going to be talking about her new book, Take It From Me. Yes, it's very exciting. Today is actually part 3 of our 6-part series called Fall into Reading. And each week we're chatting with a different author and talking about a different book to help you plan your fall reading selections. So we're going to chat for about 45 minutes today. It's intended to be a conversation. Jamie and I will be conversing, but you can join us on stage at any time. Ask questions, make a comment, say hello. If you want to see yourself on screen, come on up. We love to have you. And did you also know that you can broadcast live our events by clicking on the lower left-hand corner of your screen, that little circle they call the hamburger, and there's a little globe on there icon that you can broadcast live, and we usually do that as well. And for those of you who are listening on our public profile page, welcome to those of you who are joining us there and on our social media channels. And I see Debbie is broadcasting live down below. Thank you, Debbie, for doing that. If you haven't already pre-ordered a copy of Jamie's book, Take It From Me, you can visit our website, adventuresbythebook.com, and we'll put that website shortly on the fortune cookie in the middle of your screen for convenience. It will be shipped to you with a special signed book plate, so it's an autographed copy. And just a reminder, if you've already ordered the book, it's not released until September 20th, and we will mail it out as soon as we can. And I see that somebody else is broadcasting live in our virtual audience. Thank you so much for that. We appreciate it. As I previously mentioned, Jamie is a USA Today and Wall Street Journal best-selling author of realistic and heartwarming stories that have sold more than 3 million copies. 3 million. That's pretty amazing. She's a 2-time Booksellers Best Award finalist, a National Reader's Choice Award winner, and Critics at Kirkus Publish Wiz Weekly, and Booklist have respectively called her work smart, poignant, and entertaining. Her new book, again, Take It From Me, as I showed you before, is a humorous and heartwarming novel about friendship and all its little secrets. And our lucky audience members get a sneak peek because, as I mentioned, her book is not out yet, not for a couple weeks. So, congratulations on the new book and welcome, Jamie.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And
Yeah. So I'm just gonna, I don't know if you can turn up your volume a little bit. I don't know if it's on my end or not, but I'm having a little hard time hearing you. I know my hearing is going, so
is that better?
that's better. Thank you for doing that. So our listeners know that I always like to start by getting to know our authors a little bit more personally before we dig into the juicy details of your book, what life was like before you were a successful writer. So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about your first exposure to books and to writing as a child or as a youngster. What inspired you? Were you a big reader? Did you discover reading and writing late? Did you have a particular person in your life that was a mentor to you in that regard?
I did not have any mentors. And I would say, as a young child, I was not a particularly avid reader. I always had a big imagination. And I actually, as a teenager, wanted to write movies or television shows. I was more interested sort of in film and I loved dramatic stories, movies like Out of Africa, which obviously is based on a real life story. But things like that really compelled me. But I did, as a child, like my favorite childhood book was Charlotte's Web. I love things that make me cry or make me think. And I try to write books that, have some of that in them as well. I was a lawyer after school. I was a lawyer for 10 years. So I really didn't seriously consider writing until my children were both in grade school and I had some free time suddenly. And so I used that time to think, oh, maybe I can write a book. And I did it sort of backwards. I did it from gut instinct. And after I finished a manuscript, I finally told my husband and my mother what I did. And then I went and learned everything that I did wrong. But I'm not sorry because I think allowing just that passion to take over and complete a manuscript gave me the confidence to then go back and learn. I think I might have been overwhelmed if I had done it the right way. So it worked for me. I don't know.
Absolutely. Well, it's clearly worked for you. I mean, look at you on the New York or the Wall Street Journal bestsellers list, the USA Today bestseller list. Clearly, you've done something right. I also like to talk about the trajectory of your writing career too, because I've talked to so many authors and they have such an eclectic background. Now, you mentioned you were a lawyer, so was that your original profession early on, and then you just stayed in that until you transitioned to writing? And what kind of law did you practice anyway?
I was a commercial real estate and lending lawyer. So I worked for a firm, but I represented developers or banks, excuse me, in transactional work. I'm not a very confrontational person, so litigation was never going to be something I liked. But, working in transactions, everyone wants the same result. It's just everyone wants the best deal to get there. So there's a little bit of conflict, but not really. And I like that. It was fun. I love real estate. There was a little part of me that wanted to go into that myself from the business side. But really, being a lawyer I know tons of women do it as moms. Hats off to them. I found it to be a difficult thing to try to juggle. And so when I had my daughter, I basically stopped working. And then I had my son not long thereafter. And so, like I said, I was lucky to have the choice to stay home. But then I was bored too. So once they were in school, I was looking around for something to do that it would allow me the flexibility to still be home when they got home from school and, to be present for things that they still needed me for. But it was just a great release and using a different part of my brain and letting that sort of imagination and those sort of childhood dreams come back. It was really fun. And hopefully a little bit of an inspiration to my kids. I try to tell them all the time, figure out what you love and then go for that. Like I almost regret that I let all those, 2 decades basically go by where I didn't really pursue what I kind of always knew I liked. And I let my parents' fears and my own fears and need for like a secure future lead me down a path that was a secure path, but I've never been happier than writing. So I'm glad that I switched.
Yeah, and I don't think that previous careers or experiences are necessarily a regretful thing. I think somebody told me once that finding your passion and your career desire is really a process of elimination. You try these things, and you take things from them that work for you, and then move on to the next best thing. And you probably use some of those legal skills in your writing with contracts and negotiations with agents and publicists, I'm guessing.
I use it more actually. Well, with research, I was pretty good at research, so that helps me with writing stories. And I've actually, in many of my books, I will lean back. I also have an MBA, so I'll lean back, and if I'll weave plots around legal or business issues. That are realistic. So it gives me sort of like a center if I have a family fighting over business or, a legal issue come up. It has helped me plot some things actually. So that's not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all. I read somewhere to finish up our little chat about your personal life before we get into the book that you like dancing around the kitchen while cooking, and that you like hitting the slopes in Vermont and Utah. Is that all true? And tell us about that and some of
That is
your hobbies or interest, your life beyond books.
that is all definitely true. My mother, I think, imbued my brother and I with a love for music and dancing. She's an excellent dancer and loves, to this day, she's 80 years old and listens to pop music and, dances and, is fun. And so I've always loved that. And skiing has been a big part of my life. And since I was a child, and then my husband and I love skiing, and so our children, we have a second home in Vermont, which is really nice. So our kids grew up, going up there. So I love the mountains. It's the one place. A lot of people feel this way about the beach, but for me, when I get to the mountains, I literally can feel a physiological release, just like an exhale that takes me down. I'm a pretty high intensity person. People who know me tell me this often, so it's not a secret. But when I'm in the mountains, I literally come down a few notches, and it's very relaxing to me. So I enjoy them in the summer and the winter.
I know what you're saying. What part of Vermont?
We're kind of in between, if you're familiar with Vermont, the Stratton and Bromley ski areas and Manchester Center. So the southwestern quadrant of the state, I guess.
Okay, yeah, I just visited Vermont for the first time. I'm on a quest to visit all 50 states, and I'm up to 48. And Vermont was number 48. We went to Stowe, Vermont, and it was just such a charming place. I loved Vermont.
Did you go to the Ben and Jerry's factory up there?
You know what? We were going to, but they were closed. We went in October. It was part of our Adventures by the Book New England Fall Foliage Tour. But because of COVID, they were closed. And so we didn't get to go. And that was a big disappointment.
I've been I've been to the Flavor Graveyard. My
What's your
husband is a
favorite?
huge ice cream fan, so
What's your favorite?
um, my favorite flavor of theirs is actually just the basic cherry Garcia, the old school, nice chocolate and cherry.
Absolutely can't go wrong there, right? Well, let's get to your new book. Take it from me. Show it one more time. It's very exciting, being published in a couple of weeks. So, without giving too much away, because we want people to buy it and to read it, can you give us a little teaser about what it's about?
Well, that's always to me a complicated question. I know that should be an easy answer, but for me, because I think in terms of like themes and things, to me, this is a book. What compelled the book, partly, honestly, was, you know, the tone of our culture right now, the divisiveness. I sometimes worry that people aren't listening to each other. And even though I might have very strong opinions about things going on, you still have to be willing to recognize someone else has a different lived experience or a different opinion, and that you might learn something if you stop shouting what you think and maybe listen. And so creating the characters of Wendy and Harper here, making them so very different from each other, each one who thinks they know better and have something to teach the other, without recognizing, that they also have something to learn from each other. At least they don't recognize that for a while. That was part of the inspiration, my personal inspiration for writing the story. And it was also kind of fun. I wanted to write something a little more lighthearted than some of my more recent books. And so this, even though it deals with a mental health issue, which is also something I like, I've written a couple books with these kinds of issues because, again, I think it's important to normalize and talk about them. But also, I loved writing Harper's neurotic writer character because she's sort of an amalgam of conversations that I've had over the past decade with many authors about all of our insecurities, the doubts, how easy it is to to feel good one moment and then terrible the next, and doubt yourself and all of these things. And so both Wendy and Harper are sort of exaggerated versions of real people. And I had fun with that. I had fun with kind of making them both over the top and, just having them learn to live, to accept who they were and learn from each other how to be happier in their lives. So.
Yeah, and so you mentioned your two protagonists, Wendy and Harper. Let's start with Wendy. She is, and I'm not giving anything away because it's on the book blurb, that she's a kleptomaniac. She's a recent empty nester, and so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about mental health in general. What did you know of it? What did you learn in your research about it? What points did you want to make in your, even though it's fictional, what points did you want to make? What do you want readers to take away as far as mental health awareness, kleptomaniac in particular? What can you share about that?
Well, I knew that it was part of the sort of umbrella of OCD. It's an impulse control disorder like the OCD type disorders, and I have some personal experience with relatives who have varying degrees of OCD. So I had a little bit of personal experience and a little bit of insight into how it can affect people's lives. Then I also did a lot of reading and I watched, a very heart-rending documentary made in Canada that followed several people with extreme OCD that really disrupted their lives. But with kleptomania specifically, it's really a very understood, or what's the word I'm looking for? They don't have as much research about this. It's very underreported because people feel a lot of shame and they don't go get help because they think they'll get in trouble if they confess. And so there wasn't a ton of research, the way there have been on other disorders that I've written about, like bipolarism or whatever. For me, it's not any one specific illness that I highlight for a specific purpose. It's more generally, I think it's important just to talk about these things and make them normal so that people living with them don't have to feel stigmatized, don't have to feel ashamed to talk about it, or that there's something like bad about it. I just think it's important to make sure that, just like in every other way, we want diverse characters. We want characters from all kinds of places so that we all become more empathetic and more understanding of each other. So that's kind of why I like to try, when I feel it works for a plot, I like to try to include something that is interesting too. I think readers like learning little bits. So anything that I wrote in here about Wendy is based on research. It's authentic for someone to feel or do who has this disorder. But it's a pretty rare disorder. I forget now. I want to say maybe like less than 1%. It's a pretty rare disorder.
And
But
you
they
kind of, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, but part of that rareness may be that it's also underreported. So you're not sure. But people often confuse it with like shoplifting, which it's not at all the same thing. So that was one point I kind of wanted to make clear and hopefully hit pretty on the nose in the book to make a distinction between those two things.
And for the listeners who don't know the distinction, can you share a little bit about the difference between kleptomaniac? Uh,
Basically, shoplifting are people who take something that they want and don't want to pay for, but they want the thing that they take. And it's a very conscious decision that they're making. With kleptomania, most of the time, the things that are taken have almost no real value, monetary value, and it's usually like an overwhelming urge that will just overcome them in a situation, often triggered by stress or the way OCD can be triggered, by stress or other things like that, and they just sort of will grab something nearby or easy. And then immediately there's like a little burst of euphoria in the taking, but then it's like the immediate shame and again, there's no real value. They're not taking something, they haven't planned it. They're not taking something that they don't feel like paying for. It's a very different kind of, it's an impulse control disorder. So the same way almost cutting is, it's a release, it's a feeling of control and release in the moment. And then again, the overwhelming shame, it's kind of similar in that regard. It seems from what I've read about both of those.
Right. No, I'm glad you brought attention to it in the book. And so your other character, Harper, you talked a little bit about, that was one of my questions actually about, so Harper was a successful writer and then her most recent novel kind of tanked. And so, she's looking forward to what's going to happen next with her career. So yeah, you have a lot of a writer community to draw from. I'm sure you talk a lot about that, as you mentioned, but I'm curious the pressure on authors really to beat or attain a certain level. I have to become a New York Times bestseller. I have to sell X number of copies. I have to earn back my advance. I have to do this. Or when they have a successful book, I mean, look at Harper Lee. Did she ever write a book again? Was it out of fear, as some say, that she could never attain that level of success again? I don't know. And I'm curious if you could talk about the pressures from an author's perspective based on your own experience and that of your fellow writers.
Yeah. Well, of course, all authors are different. All authors have different goals. So I can't say that any my thoughts or Harper's or even those of my friends are certainly applicable broadly. But there is certainly for authors who are traditionally published, there would certainly be a pressure to earn out your advance. Because if you don't earn out your advance, your chance of getting another contract are probably slim. And while indie publishing is a great option for people who want to do that, for example, someone like me, that is not an option that appeals to me because it requires you to become an expert in things beyond the writing. You kind of have to learn a lot about algorithms and how to market and package and production. And, you're really running a full small business. I like having a team. So the pressure to meet your publisher's expectations is great. Of course, everybody, wants the book to be liked by readers. So after my first book or two, I kind of stopped reading reviews because I realized that if I had 500 reviews, I would skim through any good ones, and it's all the bad ones that get you and get under your skin and really get in your head. And those are the ones you remember. And for some reason, those are the ones that you feel are like the honest reviews. And so I learned to sort of not take that in because I can't I can't write a book that every single reader is going to love. And so I finally accepted that. And so I just try to stay away. But of course, in the book, Harper, you see that repeating in the book, how she remembers those lines. And I could even, I remember one of the last bad reviews I read was on a book of mine called Accidentally Hers, which was back from like 2015, maybe. But it was such a strange and harsh one line thing that it's like, I'll never forget it, you know? So I had fun playing with that a little bit, but for sure, it's a stressful thing. You pour a lot of emotion into a book, any book, and that you write, and you put it out there, and of course, readers are. It's totally their right to have their own response to the book and to leave a review on Goodreads to share with other reader friends. And I totally support that, but I don't want to see it anymore. So that's it was, like I said, it was fun to write all of that stuff out there.
Yeah, and I
But
think a publisher once told me that a book for everyone is a book for no one. So you can't write a book that everybody is going to love.
I think that's really true, and I would use sort of the Hallmark movies as the example of that for me. Like for me, they're so vanilla, and everyone's so good, and all of the problems are external. And I know there's millions of people, probably people in this audience, who love those movies and books like that. Like that is not me, and that's probably not my reader. I like messy people and messy problems, and I like real flaws in people. Probably because I feel like I have them, and I want to show like someone can have flaws and still be heroic in their life or for someone else, or that we don't have to be these perfect, squeaky clean people to contribute something, to the world in our lives. So that's kind of what I like to explore in my books.
Yeah, and it makes it real and authentic because we're all flawed in some way, right?
Yeah, most of
Absolutely.
us anyway. Maybe there's some perfect people out there.
I have a feeling not. But so one of the themes of the book is deception. And I'm really interested in that because there's deception about careers, between spouses, between family, between friends, and even self deception. And I wonder if you can talk on that theme a little bit.
Well, I do think that this is a big part of life as well. And my mom and I sort of tease that like none of us ever sees ourselves the way other people sees us. And that's part of this sort of, right, this self-deception. It's also partly because I think we know why we're doing or saying things, and other people might project onto us while we're doing or saying something, or read into something that's not really there. So that creates part of the misperception. But I think, at least for me, in my experience in life, I'm better now that I'm older, but certainly when I was younger, I think you slowly come to realizations about yourself or your life, or you slowly admit things that are hard to admit to yourself. Particularly when you think you're trying to achieve something, or you're working on being better, and so it's almost like a little internal pep talk maybe that we give ourselves. With Wendy, her fear, her deception, her keeping things from Joe and of course from the community were, shame, obviously. But when it came to Joe, who does know, and that's also established early on that he, I think in chapter 1, it's clear that he knew that she had this problem. But she's afraid of repeating what she saw with her mother, who ended up divorced because her mother's mental illness. And so she has seen how, people can lose patience with people who struggle with mental illnesses, and she's afraid. So she would think, I think Wendy feels very justified in keeping her secrets because she's trying to keep her life together. Harper is less sympathetic. I think readers are probably less sympathetic with Harper's secrets because hers are more self-serving. She's trying to get her career back on track, and she's not trying to hurt anyone. And she's just self-centered and immature enough to not realize until maybe it's a little too late that she has hurt someone. So, but yeah, I think lies, I think we see that every day in the world too. Lies are a big part of how people unfortunately deal with things, but secrets always come out. So that was part of the story too, right? Like you can only hide the truth so long. and it will come out. And so it's better to get ahead of it than to let it get ahead of you.
Absolutely. And I was really curious about writers going incognito because Harper is a big city girl and she moves to this suburbia town to kind of research for her next book. So I'm curious about the writers. Do they do that? And in particular, I know she went to a bookstore and the bookstore owner found out who she was and outed her because she felt like she was protecting the community about being used for that purpose. I wondered if you've had that experience or talked to other writers who had that experience.
No, that was sort of I took a little liberty there. I mean, I know tons of writers who sit in coffee shops and who are will be sitting having dinner with a friend and hear the booth next to them and eavesdrop and then get plot bunnies, what they would call plot bunnies from those things. So definitely writers take things from what they hear and experience, absolutely. But I don't know personally of any writer who has gone to the extreme that Harper did by, just pretending to be out of work and not really saying what she really did. I mean, so that part was slightly, like I said, the over the top, the slightly exaggerated forms of these characters. That was a little bit more for humor than anything. But for sure, there is hopefully not the theft of like close friends, with at least not without permission, but for sure there's a lot of eavesdropping. So if you ever see someone alone with a laptop and they get suddenly quiet, know that you're being listened to and maybe be becoming a character in a book.
I have to say that I was at an event with an internationally renowned author who shall remain nameless for my story, but he was talking to his agent at a coffee shop and they were pitching his newest idea. I mean, very top secret stuff. This was a very famous writer. And somebody was at the next table tweeting and, posting on social media everything they were saying. And I just couldn't believe it.
Well, and I that is unfortunate that someone would do that on Twitter because obviously they had to know that that was not cool. On the other hand, it's not very smart to talk about top secret book ideas in a public place. So I would say everyone there was a little bit at fault. But yeah, that's if you're going to be in a public place, it's not the place to share story ideas. But it's yeah, it's a crazy world. Social media has really changed a lot.
And
A
the
lot.
lawyer in you probably sees a lot more that you're more protective than the rest of us, I'm guessing.
Um, well, for sure, I'm very careful, even with like in my newsletters, I do talk about future book ideas, but in a very vague way. I wait because, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of different ways to think about it. And, if I gave a writing prompt, a simple like spine, a story spine to everyone in this audience and said, okay, everyone go write a short story. And here's the two characters and here's the big conflict. You'd still have however many people there are in this audience, that many different, they'd be different even though they'd be the same. So on one hand, maybe we don't need to be so worried about people stealing our ideas. You can't really trademark or copyright ideas. But if you think you have a really novel hook, something that no one's thought of yet that feels really fresh, I would protect that very seriously. I would not discuss it in public for sure.
Yeah.
So.
And since your book is not historical fiction, you might not think it required a lot of research, but you talked a little bit about how you do like research. You're good at it from your legal background. And what kind of research did you do? I know you had to do some research into mental health, but what else did you have to do? And do you typically have to do that for non-historical fiction books?
I research tons of things in every single one of my books, from obviously mental health things. Wendy in this book is a furniture refinisher, so I talked with someone who does that as a sort of more than a hobby, but not like a full career. They do it and sell pieces sporadically, kind of like Wendy. I watched many videos about how to do it. I read about that so that I could get things kind of right. I live near New York City, but I don't live in New York City. So, like research can be going down there and walking through the neighborhoods. Trying to think what else was in this book that I researched. What was Nate's job? Well, I kind of understood Nate's and the public job there. So yeah, but in all of my books, I'll research. This book is actually set in the town where I live now, so I didn't have to do a ton of research. That saved me some time. But typically, when I've written books set in the Pacific Northwest or whatever, I'll research those areas. I always research the careers of my characters, particularly if they're careers that I'm not familiar with, and if there's been infertility. I've dealt with cancer, infertility, gunshot wounds, surgeries, anything that's in the book, I research because I want to make sure that when I write it, even if it's just one or two lines, I want it to feel right. I don't want the doctor or the whomever to pick up the book and read it and be like, that would never happen. Like I've done many times when people write legal things and they don't know what they're doing, because it really will pull you out of the story. So I know I get stuff wrong, but I try to get it as right as I can.
Right now, sometimes I'm watching a TV show, a medical show, and my husband's a physician, and throughout the whole show is that's not going to happen. That wouldn't happen. I thought, could you just be quiet and let me enjoy the show? Difference, right?
And for sure, like with something like the law, especially if it's like a book about a trial, of course they're going to have to take liberties and condense things because otherwise you're going to have a 3-year long timeline and a lot of boring depositions. So, there's a certain amount of condensing and sort of falseness that we can go with, right? But you can't just blatantly ignore how something should be. And so it's good to understand that even if you're going to break the rule, just so you can break it in the.
Yeah, and I'm always impressed with authors like you who do their research. I have a friend who's writing their first historical fiction novel, and her book is publishing in October. And the research she did, and I only know it because she's a friend of mine, and she shared with me. But every little detail, like her book takes place in the 1940s, World War II, and she had to research, did men's zippers zip up on the left side or the right side? And I thought, my God, I mean, every little detail. How did you find a time to write the book when you're worried about all those things? But it really makes for an authentic experience. So we readers appreciate that in you.
Thanks.
And is your audio working?
It is. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. I thought you cut out for a minute. So you also write in the book about gender inequities. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you incorporated that into the book and your characters, and what was your intent on writing about that? What inspired that, and what was your message?
Um, okay, that's a lot of questions. Let me try to break down. So Harper is the one. She's the sort of, feminist. And again, a slightly exaggerated version, but a couple of things I think in the last several years, we've seen a lot being made of, the Me Too movement and things like that have brought things more to the fore. I have a daughter in college, so, I'm looking at her going into her career. And I think back to my law career, my first law firm, there was only one female partner when I started, and that was 1990. So, at the time, I remember one of the oldest partners at that firm used to call me dear. Now, he was literally 82 and I was 24. And at first, I wasn't offended by that. I just thought he was like a sweet old man who looked at me like a granddaughter. But other women in the firm really got mad about that. And it wasn't until years later that I really started to recognize how, even though I knew his intent was not to diminish me in any way, it was diminishing in a way. And because he didn't call my male colleagues who were my age son or some other, endearment. And so, I don't want that for my daughter, right? I want her to have, a level playing field. So part of it was, even for people in my generation who maybe weren't as attuned or kind of want to say, oh, that's not a big deal, but maybe it really is a bigger deal than I thought it was at the time. And at the same time, I don't like the idea that women who want to choose a more traditional sort of lifestyle like I did for a number of years when I chose to stay at home and be the one with my children all the time and step back from my career for a while. Like, I don't want to see that invalidated as a choice. Like, a woman, whatever choice we make, it should be the same as any man who wants to make that choice. And so that was part of Wendy and Harper's learning that, like, you know, to help each other see that in each other. I don't know. Did that fully answer your question? I'm not sure I hit all the
Yes, and I
points.
was just curious about it because those of us of a certain age, and I know you're obviously way younger than me, but we've all experienced those things. And I was a paralegal in a former life, and one of the attorneys I used to work for would call me his girl, and we'd get a client in, and he'd say, "My girl's going to go get us coffee," and I thought. I was so offended by that. First of all, I didn't take this job to serve coffee. And second of all, I have a name. But you just grow accustomed to that and you have to tolerate that because it was the times. And so I'm so glad to see that's not totally changed, but it is changing. And so books like yours that raise awareness to that, kudos to you for that.
Thank you.
And I just want to remind everyone, I know our time is running low. We still have time and I have a million questions for you, but I want to make sure the audience, if they have any questions, they can invite themselves up on stage to ask a question, make a comment, anything we've talked about or that you want to add. Debbie, welcome to the stage. Did you have a question or comment for Jamie?
Hi, Susan. Thank you for inviting me on stage. Hi, Jamie. It's a pleasure to sit down and listen to this conversation. I just finished your book last night and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you for writing it. So a couple things. First, just a comment. This is the first book I've read that makes a casual mention of well, we're not really post-COVID, but COVID as the here and now. And just, I don't know, that kind of struck me. So I'm sure there'll be more of that comes up with books in the future. But uh, did you feel like you needed to throw that piece in there just to make it more current to date, or was that just?
Um, I'm trying to, in this book, I'm trying to remember. It's hard. I'm editing the book that comes out next year right now, which is more medically involved, and so there's a lot more reference to COVID. I'm trying to remember where I even mentioned it here. I think you know. Uh, it's certainly a choice. I know a lot of authors are choosing to ignore it because it will date the book in a way. And like I said, right now, off the top of my head, I can't remember in what context I put it in here. So, but oh, was it when someone was maybe getting sick or something like that? I think I just felt like not mentioning it, and I think it's it's just so quietly said, but I do think that I thought I had to mention it. I couldn't just ignore it because if someone's coughing and stuff, now it's the first thing we think. Like, if I'm anywhere and someone sneezes or coughs, I'm like, ooh, So I just felt like not mentioning it would pull the reader out of the story. But it's one of those things that probably can go either way. Some readers probably don't like it and some probably appreciate it. I don't know.
I actually had that same observation, Debbie, so I'm glad you asked the question.
Yeah. It's just the first book I've read that had mention of it. It didn't offend me. It wasn't an issue. It's just like, oh, okay, this is current day story. So my question, I have a lot of questions actually. I won't take up all the space, but just little things that struck me. So does Madeline Miller know that Circe is in your book as
Oh,
Nate's favorite book?
I love that book and I love Madeline too.
no, I just threw that in there. So, um, I like to put in. If you go back through a lot of my books, you'll see references to songs, or artists or books that have been interesting to me or whatever, and I'll slip them in if I feel like they can add something to a conversation or if they're relevant in some way to a character or whatever. I try to slip that stuff in. I think that's fun. I haven't put songs in for a while, but that was a big thing for me for a while.
We're going to have to send a recording of this to Madeline Miller because pre-COVID, she and I were in discussions to do a Greek adventure by the book, and we were all set. We had a little plan, and then COVID came along and derailed that. So maybe that'll put a bug in her ear.
Well, I
Well,
will tell you that I haven't read Circe yet. Actually, now I am reading. I had read Song of Achilles and loved it. And so I was just curious what that was for. That was interesting. So if anything else, you got another book reader for Madeline through your book.
Yay, me.
Yeah, so thank you. I have a million questions, but I'll leave the stage so others can ask theirs. I guess I'm going to have to schedule a book club visit with you because I have so many questions, but enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you. And I see that Carol Van Den Hende, who's another of the authors that's going to be speaking in this book series, is in the audience. So that's kind of fun. So it's just, it's nice to have all these authors here and have them at our beckon and call, if you will, to ask questions of. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Thanks for your questions. And, Debbie mentioned book clubs, which is a reminder that we also have a service called Novel Network. And you can, as a book club, you can join for free. Go to novelnetwork.com and you can access our database of about 125 authors, maybe 135. I don't know where we're at now. And schedule a book club visit. And Jamie is one of our Novel Network authors. So if your book club is interested, you can have this conversation over Zoom or whatever platform you choose with Jamie, personal group. You can ask her your personal questions and get more in depth. So thank you for reminding me that, Debbie. And I see that Stephanie has joined us on stage. Welcome, Stephanie. It's nice to see you again. How are you?
You too, Susan. I'm fine. And I'm so thrilled to see Jamie here talking with you. This is awesome. And Jamie, I had a question. It's not directly related to this particular book, but I was curious. You're such a great author. Without asking you a ginormous question, we could probably have an entire podcast about, but how did you make that first leap to become an author? How did you sit down and say, I'm going to start writing? What spurred that whole journey for you?
Well, I said earlier, I had not been working for a couple of years. And so I was finding myself like, with the young kids, I needed to do something with all my energy. So I looked into like becoming a real estate broker. I was volunteering at a local nonprofit public health thing here in my town that focused on children's mental and emotional well-being. I was a board member there. I did all these things, but nothing was enough. I still felt like I just had all this time. And so one year my kids just, they got on the bus one day and I came back and I was like, I've got to do something. And I can't honestly recall the exact trigger, but I just thought, the Big Mac was sitting, the big desktop back at the time. This was back, I don't even remember when, 2010, maybe 2009. And I just thought, maybe I should try to write a book. And the book that I tried to write is under my bed. It will never be seen by anyone, but it was basically a YA, kind of a romance, I guess. But it was really a coming of age with a strong romantic element. That I wrote with my daughter in mind, like a female character who learns to stand on her own 2 feet and stand up for herself and stuff like that. And it just was something I always, like I said, when I was young, I wanted to do it. My parents were like, oh, writer, you can't be a writer. That's not secure. Can't make money doing it. It's all very true. For the most part, it's not a secure career and a lot of people can't do it exclusively. But I had the good fortune to have the opportunity to take the chance because I was at home not doing anything else. So, and I just loved it. It was just, I always tell people it's the one time in my life where I get to decide what everyone does and says, and it turns out exactly the way I want it to. And that never happens anywhere else. So.
I love that. So accurate. I'm sorry if you probably already covered this. I was a little late to the show. I apologize, but that's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Well, Stephanie, I'm curious, are you asking that question because you have a book in you?
I might. I feel like something is brewing and I'm not really sure what's guiding that, but I think that there are a lot of stories that I think for me, it's interesting, and I don't know if there's necessarily even a right approach, but I feel like so many of the things that I've done in my life, I think would be relevant to people today that could positively impact some of the challenges that we're facing. And so I feel like I'm marinating on it, which is why I was curious, Jamie, how you kind of approached it. And again, I'm sure you covered that in the beginning. And again, I'm sorry that I was late to the show, but yes, I'm noodling over it.
Oh, great question. Well, I'll be curious to follow that. Stephanie is another content creator on Fireside, and you can follow her as well as Jamie and as well as any of our attendees on Fireside anytime they're on there. Just click on their icon and hit the follow button, and anytime they're here, you'll get a notice of it. And she is the known slayer of disinformation. Last time I introduced her, I said she was the slayer of information.
Did you, Susan? That's
I
so
did,
funny.
and I thought,
Whoops.
how did I screw that up? But you have so much disinformation you've slayed. I bet you have a lot of stories to write about, and I'll be curious to see when that happens.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And Jamie, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Thanks for.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I see that Deanna has joined us on stage. Welcome, Deanna. I know that she made a comment about she has a lot of writing in her too. So I'd love to hear about your thoughts, Deanna. Welcome.
Thank you. And I would say that you're not incorrect about Stephanie being a slayer of information, too. She has a lot of information. She has a lot of information so that she can move out the disinformation.
Absolutely.
So the thing I wanted to ask, because I have things in me, like you said, really have a tendency to write a lot of stuff about me personally, like putting stuff in there like Stephanie was talking about that you think would help other people. It's not fiction per se, but I also have toyed with the idea of making it fiction that is based on these realities so that it's easier to read and it's not this, oh, so here's the 7 keys to doing this, self-help book, which I'm tired of. That's one part. And if that was something that you kind of use, if that's how you approach things. And the other thing too, that I wanted to just comment on is the fact that I haven't read this book, but the ability to make a flawed character someone that you relate to and you can sympathize with, like when you root for the bad guy almost sometimes. So I think that that's like, like a Maleficent, right? Like you can see that side of them, and being able to write that is pretty gifted, I think. So I love that. But just advice in the area of real, but moving it into fiction.
Well, I've never done that. So none of my stories are biographical of any one person I know or autobiographical in any way. But I definitely draw inspiration from things that are important to me. So if there's a topic that's important to you, I think you can build a theme and a structure, a fictional structure around that. You would basically, I would think, want to approach it from a character perspective and put that character, whatever your theme or your message of your story is, you want to build a character that would have a very hard time learning that message, right? Because conflict is tension, and tension is what keeps people turning the page. And then you would, create this construct to move them through, to set up obstacles, both inner and external obstacles, to move them through the various steps. You referenced self-help, so I'm going to call them steps. Learning steps that they would have to, that would be their arc. That would essentially, what you're talking about is building the internal arc of the character based on something that, your experiences or things that you think are important, and having them come out the other side stronger, smarter, whatever that arc is. So, I definitely think that is something a lot of authors do, not necessarily built on personal things, but just general beliefs. And I think that's totally a valid way to go. Does that help?
No, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Susan. Did you have
No,
something
I
you
was
wanted
just
to
going
add
to
for
ask
me?
if you want to share anything about what you're considering writing or what you're.
Okay. So I work in the area of trauma, and that comes from the personal experience with intimate partner violence. And it is such a big thing in the Me Too movement and the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial and just all the stuff that's out there. And I don't want to come at it, like I have written, PDFs and guides and whole coaching programs on this, but I don't want to come at it from the self-help, personal development, angle, I would love to, approach it like you said. You described it perfectly, actually. So I think, like you said, the character arc of how I came to the other side, right? My show is called Laughter After Trauma, right? How I came to the other side, how would those keys that I wound up putting together as part of my program to say, hey, I realized that I didn't see this. And that's what allowed me to stay in a relationship for 18 years. You know what I'm saying? But put it into a character, make it a
So
story.
one book that I read years ago, but it's popular again now, that actually touches on domestic violence or in a very big way, is Colleen Hoover's It Ends With Us. And when I was reading that, I knew before I even got to the author's note at the end that she had lived that experience probably as a child, because I also lived, I've never experienced it personally, but my dad was a violent person. And so that's a great example of a fairly recent book. It's probably 5 or 6 years old, where she sort of walks you through how this woman gets into this relationship and eventually why she gets herself out and how she does it. And it doesn't feel like a self-help novel at all. It's very emotionally, it's that's why there's a reason why it keeps, it was a reader's favorite, Goodreads choice winner the year it was published, and it's back up on the top of the charts again because now she's a TikTok favorite author, so all her books are up there. But that's a good, if you haven't read it, maybe read that and just see how she did it. Now, you're not going to copy her story, but like I said, that's not the only book out there either, but it's the first one that came to mind. Kennedy Ryan also wrote a book about that had a domestic violence thing in it a couple years ago, Long Shot or something like that. I can't remember now what it was called, but I think she won the Rita, the Romance Writers of America Rita Award for that book. So that's another one you might look at for just an example of how authors do that.
Yeah, I'll check it out because there's some generational things that I think have impacted that I'd like to approach. And I do think there's certain cycles. So I didn't really have this issue in my family, but because I went through this issue, it exposed my kids to some danger. And those cycles, I think, happen more often than not, too. So I just think there's a lot you can go with it.
Talks about. Thus the title, It Ends With Us. The cycle of this is part of that story. So
yeah, I'll have to look at it.
I'm sorry you had to experience that, and you're welcome, and good luck.
Thank you, Deanna.
I have found the laughter, not looking for sorrow. I am great. Thank you, though.
Thank you. And I see that Debbie has joined us back on stage, but I did want to remind everybody that for those who are regulars, they know how to invite themselves up on stage. But if you don't know how to do that, you just go to the little hamburger button, which is in the circle in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. And you just say invite to stage or invite, I think it's invite to stage, what it says. And also I see Carol Den Hende in the audience. I know Debbie had mentioned her earlier, and she's going to be on an upcoming show, and I'm going to invite her on stage, not to scare her off, but because I want her to practice this for her future show. So we'll take Debbie's question first, since she joined us first, and then we'll go to Carol. Debbie, did you have another question for us?
Yeah, thank you. So it's kind of a follow-up on what you were just speaking about with Deanna. So Jamie, is it possible to write a novel about a subject that's I don't know, foreign or unknown to you and make it personal and real? I mean, does it require personal experience to write a believable story? I mean, especially, when we're talking about relationships.
I don't think so, because, I've written a book about a woman whose husband commits suicide. I haven't had that happen to me. I've written a book about someone who survives breast cancer. I haven't had that happen to me. I've written a book. Most of the things in my books, I've never actually personally experienced directly the way the character has. But, we all, what it feels like to be afraid. You know what it feels like to, make a bad choice and not know how to get out of it. So there are responses and emotions that you can relate to as an author, even if your direct experience with that emotion is somewhat different from your characters. So, and plus, I'll tell you, for me, I don't know how authors existed before Google and YouTube. But for example, in the book that I wrote that dealt with bipolar issues, I watched so many hours of bipolar and bipolar spouses just talking, videoing themselves while they were in a manic phase, videoing themselves while they were in a depressive state, the spouses talking about the struggles of living with someone with this disorder. You can get so much direct information now by virtue of all these social media apps, in addition to like the old school traditional calling a doctor and interviewing a psychiatrist about how they treat these patients and things like that. But because people who are just like the woman we just talked to wants to tell her story and help other people who are struggling with that, there's so many sources of information to help authors bring that character to life in a real way. I don't think it's hurt me. I hope it hasn't. So
Thank you. And thank you for your
Thank you.
question.
yeah.
Okay, next I know we're running out of time, but I do want to invite Carol. So I've invited Carol on stage. I invited her to video if she accepts and wants to join us on video. She's more than welcome to. I want her to practice this because she's got an upcoming show. Hi, Carol. Nice to meet you. And so I don't know if she joined us because I invited her and wanted to teach her how to use this app, or if she actually had a question or comment for Jamie. So take it away, Carol. Did you have a question or comment, or did you just want to say hello?
Well, great to see you both, Susan and Jamie. That was an amazing interview. I don't have a specific question, but I do want to say, first of all, I love how conversational this was. I can't wait to talk about research with you, Susan. Your questions are amazing, and I think we're going to have a really wonderful conversation because my writing is inspired by combat wounded veterans. And this, Jamie, so many of the themes that you talk about and the topics really resonate with me. And I love the perspective from another author, you know, from Jamie, but also the writers and the aspiring authors who are in the audience asking questions. Just the forum is fabulous. So thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad. And, you know, Deanna, who was up on stage a few minutes ago, she has a show, Laughter After Trauma. So she may want to consider inviting both of you up on her show to talk as well. So I'm glad you're here, Carol. I can't wait to chat with you in a few weeks about your book as well. And thank you for joining us.
This was a great evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, take care. So I know that we are about out of time, and I'm pushing buttons on my phone that aren't working, so I'm a little distracted right now. So give me just a second. All right, here we go. All right, back to Jamie. I know that our time's about run out, but I wanted to make sure that we covered anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to mention about your book, upcoming books, facts, wars, anything that we've missed that you want to add.
Not really. Like I said, I had fun writing this book. My last couple books dealt with bigger, more traumatic and angsty things, and this was a little bit of a departure and an attempt to infuse a little humor into my writing. One thing about Wendy that we didn't talk about that is in this book too is sort of the empty nest stage of life and how marriages sometimes get a little bit stale or have their own issues, and you don't always know why or how you got there and how you confront that and deal with that. So that's probably the most relatable thing in this book for the wide audience, because, you know, for people who've been in long-term relationships or have seen their kids move out of their home, like some of those issues will feel more relatable to them than the kleptomania or certainly than Harper's crazy antics trying to get her career back on track. So I do think there's a little bit of something for everybody in here, hopefully. And I hope you have fun with it, really.
I agreed. I really enjoyed the book a lot. I just tore through it, and it was light, but it was interesting. It was well researched. I like how you wrote the characters, and I learned so much. So thank you for that. And so, where can people find you? Social media? What social media on your website? Anything you want to share about that?
I'm pretty much everywhere, sadly, although I did take a little break this summer with social media. But I'm on Instagram at writer Jamie Beck. I'm on Facebook at Jamie Beck Books. I have a newsletter. My website's jamiebeck.com, and I have a newsletter with a birthday bunch. So I give away random birthday gifts to people who share their birthday and month. You don't have to tell me the year, but just if you tell me the day and month, you enter into like a what's it called? I'm losing my words, but like a random drawing during your birth month, and I sent out a little box with a book and a mug and some fun things. And so I've sort of tried TikTok, but it's I think I'm too old. I feel silly on it. So
And now you can follow her on Fireside. You just click on her icon and hit the follow button. You can do the same on my icon. We interview authors pretty much every week. Sometimes we double up. I think coming up, we have 2 authors next week or the week after, which I don't know why we're doing that, but we're fortunate to be able to do that. But it's a lot of work. So look for those. And let's see, what else do we have? Our next event is part 4 of this Fall Into Reading series with historical novelist Gill Paul, who will be joining us from Europe. So by the time we're talking to her, it's going to be the middle of the night there. So I hope you come and cheer her on, because she's giving that up for us to talk about her new book, The Manhattan Girls, a 1920s version of Sex in the City, which will be really fun. I hope that you will follow Jamie and order her book again, adventuresbythebook.com. You can take it from me on our website, and we will send you a copy with an autographed book plate. You'll get a special edition when the book is out. And if you're not familiar with Adventures by the Book, besides Fireside, we do Zoom events. We do a popular book bingo with 6 authors. We have one coming up in a few weeks. We also do in-person events in the Southern California region, and we travel around the world with authors. And due to the COVID world, we haven't scheduled anything this year, but hopefully coming again soon. So thank you again, Jamie. It was a pleasure chatting with you and your new book, Take It From Me. And I wish you success with the book. And thank you all to our virtual audience members, whether you were joining us on the virtual stage here or on our public profile page or on our social media channels. Until next time, everybody, what is your next adventure by the book? Thank you.